Good evening, good night, good morning, good afternoon, and good day to you wherever you are at this very moment in time. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Ade Presents Being You, the podcast. Being You, the podcast is an invitation to take a journey within yourself and uncover and discover what is true. It is a place for us to remember the truth of what happens when we do our work. You've heard the phrase, hurt people, right? But you must not stop there because that doesn't serve anyone. We must also remember that healed people. So the conversations here is all about healing. It's about activating something in you where you become the healer that holds space for the healing of humanity. I am Ade Adeniji, your I was going to say your podcast, your host and your podcast. Welcome. Thank you for being here. So I had a moment in time did something. So you are about to hear a conversation I had with my dear brother, friend, and namesake sometime last year. Namesake, his name is Adé Adeniji. So I thought the conversation happened late last year, 2023, maybe around November. Come to find out, we had this conversation back in May 2023. I'm still surprised because it felt like a few months ago. But what I can say after watching the conversation, it has aged. It has aged well, like fine wine. So you are in for a powerful conversation. We're going to talk about what it means to be a black man in UK, a Nigerian man in UK, a gay man in UK, and a gay man in Nigeria. I am excited to just feel into what is possible for you as you listen and take it in. But before we do that, I must remind you of the questions that I ask. 4 questions. These are the questions that will take you into yourself, take you back to yourself. Because if you are unstable in being yourself, it's hard to understand others. It's hard to build relationship that honors who you are because you're still trying to figure out who you are. So these are the questions. Number 1, how do you see yourself? Just think about that for a minute. How do you see yourself? The second question, how do you see the world? How do you see the world? Third question, how do you see yourself in the world? How do you see yourself in the world? And the fourth question is, how do you see the world in you? How do you see yourself? How do you see the world? How do you see yourself in the world? And how do you see the world in you? Now, this is a good time to pause this, to just reflect on that. And for some of you, those questions may sound like, what? Just ask the question. Close your eyes if you can. Take a deep breath. And let the answers come up for you. You may hear something you hadn't heard before. You may catch an insight. You may feel like, I don't know. But let your I don't know be curious. Because sometimes it's easy to default to I don't know. Sometimes that's a lazy approach. But even if you don't know, even if you feel like you did not hear anything, you did not feel anything, you did not see anything, you didn't taste anything, whatever, let your I don't know be curious. I don't know. See, that's different. I don't know. Or I don't know. Now, you may need some time to chew on it. And that's okay. Because what is more important is that you discover and recover who you really are. Now, without further ado, I want to invite you to sit back, hold tight, open your consciousness, open your mind, open your heart, and just let truth take you higher with my brother friend Adewale Adeniji. And I'm going to discover some things about his name that I didn't know before. So, welcome to another episode of Ade Presents Being You. Peace and blessings. My brother, it is so good to have you join me. This is going to be fun. I already know it. First of all, we have the name thing going on. And I think of how we met and how I met you first. So anyway, you have human resources and leadership is your thing. And when I think of human resources, I think of somebody who is connected in tune with humanity. And whether it's in the corporate world or the not-for-profit world, there's something about that human resources. Because I think like if humans and we wake up to bringing our resources together, we can create some shift, some change, some transformation. So thank you for being here. Well, let's jump right in. So your full name is
Adewale, Adebola, Adeniji.
That's funny. I didn't know your middle name. So one of the things I do with my guests is to ask, what does your name mean to you? Or your names? And the fact
Mm-hmm.
that you have Ade 3 times is quite interesting.
It is. It is. So, as you know, Ade means crown. There might be
Mhm,
viewers, listeners who don't know that. Um, and Adewale means the crown has come home. And I think for me, in terms of my name, there is something there around coming home, homecoming.
mm,
One of the themes that constantly emerges in my journey is this thing around transition, something
mhm,
around movement, something around homecoming.
mm,
So it's coming home to myself. That's what my name means to me.
mhm. What about your middle name? You said Ade. Is it Adebo or
Adebola, Adebola.
Adebola? How interesting. And your last name Adeniji. What does that mean? I actually don't know what that means.
Um,
Niji. Does it mean like?
it's I mean, my interpretation of it,
Mhm.
and there might be viewers watching this who are like, that is completely wrong.
You know how
Um,
Nigeria people are. They be like, my
exactly.
friend, Ajebota.
So I feel very nervous if we try to explain it. But the way that I sort of explain it is the crown is sacred. The crown is grounded. Adeniji, Niji. There's
Hmm.
something around wholesome, grounded, settled. So
Yeah.
yeah, wholesome is the way that I I kind of see it. And the Adebola is the crown has given birth to wealth. The
Right,
crown, yeah,
right. Yeah, I'm gonna look into your last name because I'm kind of thinking Adeniji is almost like also means like praise worthy. I mean, it's
yeah,
sacred.
yeah.
Because sometimes I'm not able to come up with it. I love our language and the fact, the way that we are named.
Mm-hmm.
You know, names that tell a story.
Mm,
And you know, I didn't know that I was a name snob until I moved to America. Because when I go to America, people say, I don't know the meaning of my name. I'm like, what do you mean you don't know the meaning of your name? Or somebody would say, oh, my name is a combination of my father and my mother's name. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Well, I was a snob. And then I came back to myself. I came back home to
mm,
myself. Like, relax.
mm,
This is just done differently. So I got to a place where I tell people and saying, you know, your name means what you just said is a combination of your father's name and your mother's name, and so
mm,
be it.
mm.
Names, they're so rich. It says a lot about us, and
Yeah.
I just feel like the more we tap in and align with the names, our names, I think we walk in the world differently.
Mm-hmm.
I remember many years when I was in America, one lady said to me, "You walk like a king." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I've heard other people talk about how I walk, like wiggle. I'm like, I have no idea. And at that point, I
Mm,
wasn't really, didn't investigate my name to really go deep. It's just, I knew mint crown. That was it. Ade, it was Ademola, but Ade
mm,
is what I was using. It
mm-hmm.
wasn't until I came back here that I started saying, that I realized, I
Mm,
see now. Those people saw me better than I saw myself. And
mm,
gives me a deeper appreciation for our names. So there's a lot of different topics, different angles. Want to cover conversations around being a Nigerian, being a man, being a gay Nigerian man, and culture and emotion. So let's see how much we could tackle because there's a really big topics, right? But before we do that, I want to let's talk about your journey of being you.
mm-hmm.
And even before you talk about that, when you think of being you, what does that
Mm.
mean to you?
Being me, there are different dimensions to that actually. So there is the being me when I'm with myself.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm with myself. So am I in touch with my essence? Am I in touch with my core self? Am I in touch with all aspects of me? So for me, that being me is about the light and the shadow, the ups and the downs, and everything in between. Am I able to be that with myself? So when I'm with myself, am I able to harness that? And then there's another aspect to it, which is around being me when I'm in relationship, when I'm in the presence of others.
Mm-hmm.
Am I able to bring that light and shadow, those ups and downs, and everything in between to my relationships and to the communities that I belong. So for me, being me is integrating all aspects of
Mm-hmm.
who I am, all aspects of who I am, rather than bringing fragments and pieces into my encounters, into my relationships and interactions.
Mm-hmm. And for some of us, we do bring our fragmented self to spaces, to work, to relationships, and sometimes we wonder why we experience the things that we go through because we're not bringing the whole of us. And I'm not even going to say that as if it's easy because I don't know if I had this conversation with you before. It's like that statement about, well, all you got to do is be yourself. That's
Mm,
easy. That's BS. Being yourself is a journey, is a process. Sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's hard, it's difficult. In a world where we are conditioned to be something other than who we are, or
mm,
being conditioned to show up as a certain kind of way, whether it's through school, through religion, through culture, through professionally. so we can communicate a certain message. I don't know anybody who can tell me that's easy. And I don't think anybody can tell me that. And even if they did, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So let's talk
Yeah.
about. Sorry, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it's not because, as human beings, we're wired for connection. That
Mm-hmm.
is so innate in us. And for many of us, we sacrifice that
Yes.
authenticity for the hope, the promise, the illusion of connection. So if I
Mm-hmm.
meet another, if I'm with another, and I feel there's an aspect of who I am that they might reject, that they might not accept, what I'll probably do is hold back on that aspect because I'm longing for connection. And for many of us, we learned that from infancy. The
Yes.
behaviors, the attitudes that were seen as welcoming by our parents. When we clock that, we show more of that and leave the other parts behind. And that's certainly a big part of my journey, which is why I talk about integrated self a lot, because the integrated for me means bringing those different aspects. It's bringing all those different fragments together as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to leaving certain aspects at the door.
Mm. So let's talk about those fragmented self. Let's talk about your journey. You were born in UK or was it in Nigeria?
Yeah, I was born in the UK. So my parents came to the UK in the mid 60s. I was born in 1968, and then my parents went back in the mid 70s, and I went back with them. So I spent the first 6 years of my life in the UK.
Mm. And what was the impact of that beginning, your beginning story of being born here and then going back to Nigeria? How long were you in Nigeria before you came back here?
I think I was in Nigeria for 12, maybe
Okay.
13 years. So I went to primary school and secondary school in Nigeria, and then I came back to the UK after my A levels to go to university. I think for me, those first 6 years have different dimensions to it. Certainly, when I was growing up, the memories that I have of it was of a magical time,
Mm,
of a time where I was free, expressive, and I would say integrated to a certain degree. Um, but the more I sort of start to unpick that chapter of my life, the more I start to see some fragments in between all of that.
right.
So I lived with a white foster family between 8 weeks and six, actually, when we returned to Nigeria. I was with one foster family from 8 weeks till five, and then with another foster family from five till just before I hit six.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of the first foster family, they were loving, they were caring. It had gotten to a stage where I was actually referring to my white foster mother as mum and calling my biological mother auntie. And um, and yeah, it's a fascinating time. I think for me, one of the wounds that was created during that period was around being an outsider, not feeling this sense of belonging, this sense of yearning, longing,
Mm-hmm.
because I was different. So even though they loved me, and I know that they loved me, um, there are these memories that I certainly have of looking around and seeing no one like me. And that
Mm-hmm.
is a pattern, that is a trait that is still there
Yeah.
now, actually. When I go into spaces,
Mm-hmm.
like even without thinking about it, one of the first things I do is I notice myself scanning, almost like there's this memory from childhood that's going, you're going to be
Mm.
the only one, you're going to be different. So let's just check to make sure. So I'm constantly scanning my environment to see whether that outsider narrative is going to be playing out in the present.
I'm laughing because, oh my God, I love this thing called life. Now, of course, you and I have talked about, we're both Nigerians who were born here, and I'm hearing other fragments, if you will, other aspects of your story that I didn't know, and I'm catching the similarities, and it's just like wild.
Mm,
Um, I went to my first nanny as well. Um, I think about 8 weeks. The first nanny wasn't white; she was black, a West Indian nanny. I was there for 2 weeks. Um, she gave me alcohol and it's trying to put me to sleep. And then my parents came, and my father could smell alcohol in my breath. It was like, I'm taking my son. And then about 2 weeks later, they found another nanny. This was white. I called her my, because it was in Hastings. So I called her my white, not white, I called her my Hastings mother.
mhm,
And I called my biological mother my London mother.
mm,
And when you talk about the difference, because for me, just as I was sharing with you before we started recording, the healing process that I went through in the last few days around feeling fear of being rejected, and and I saw how that tied into a lot of things that I wasn't even aware of. So I was in
mm,
this space where, Hastings back in the day, and even up to 2016, no, 2006. But I don't know what it's like there now. There still wasn't a lot of black people. Of course, when you're talking about
mm,
1968, 1969, there wasn't a lot of black people till
mm,
72. And standing out.
mhm,
And it could be the conversations that people had or how they're looking. Even though as a baby, as an infant, we didn't have the words to communicate with people looking, we can still sense
mhm,
whatever it is. Either they're admiring or thinking, he's kind of odd. His hair looks different. So for me, when I show up in this space, I show up feeling like I'm going to be different.
mm,
Part of what came up for me with the fear of being rejected is I was constantly monitoring me feeling like I'm already different. So if
mhm,
I'm talking about my work, the way I talk about it is a way that I think they can understand it. So that standing out for me is constant. It's
mm,
constant. And to hear you say that right now, and what I went through the last few days is just like, wow,
mm.
wow. Did your parents know about that experience? Or how you feel like you're in two worlds?
Not really. I mean, for my parents, they saw this as the norm. Loads of families who were coming from
Absolutely.
Nigeria,
Yeah.
not just Nigeria, but the different parts of the former
Ghana.
British
Yeah.
colonies,
Yes.
they saw this as the norm. And I think for many of them, they saw this as a version of the extended family, which they had back home. So
Mm,
back home in Nigeria, there'll be an uncle or an auntie or a neighbor
yes.
who would look after the child, that
Mm-hmm.
sort of community looking after the baby. So I think they saw it as that. And I suspect for some of them, they kind of saw it as prestigious as well. There was this
Yes.
kid who was going to be living with a white family.
Yes.
So there was also that element of it. It was seen as a sign of affluence. So I think my
Absolutely.
parents saw it as a positive thing. And in the discussions that came up when I was growing up, there was nothing negative that came out of it. And even for myself, I never really critiqued it up until probably my 20s. I remember when I came back to the UK when I was 19. I remember for my first job, I needed to provide a reference. And I didn't really know any. I mean, I knew family members, and I think I couldn't have a family member down for the reference. So I thought my foster mom. We were in touch when I was in Nigeria, so
Mm-hmm.
I contacted her to be one of my referees. And I mean, during the time that we were in Nigeria, we were in constant communication. There were letters.
Hmm.
I The love was there. So anyway, I put it down for to be a referee, and I remember speaking to her a few days, weeks after, and she said, "Oh, I sent off your form for being your referee, and I mentioned that your parents often paid me on time." And I remember thinking, "Paid? What? What you like?" It had not even entered my head
Right.
that it was a paid relationship. Like it
Yeah.
just had not. Like I
Yes.
remember being back in Nigeria when my mother would be like maybe shouting at me or flogging me, and I'd be
Hmm.
like, "You're not my mother. My mother is in the UK,"
Wow.
and my mom would laugh, and and I I remember it so clearly. Like, why is she laughing? Like, I mean, I'd not even made that dot, that connection. Like, there was
Yes.
something in my system that was like, she's my mother. And
Hmm.
so when she said that she had put down that she'd paid the bill, that my parents had paid on time, for
Hmm.
me, that was such a shock. I
Hmm.
mean, it took me ages to make peace with that
Hmm.
because where it started to take me to was, oh, this was a commercial arrangement. It was business. Like it was
It wasn't personal.
like yeah. Like I mean, what was I even thinking? Like what was
Yeah.
I even thinking? What was I thinking? Like I had not processed it. From
How?
yeah,
What do you have? What's the reference point? You didn't have any reference point to say, okay, this woman that doesn't look like my mother, she's a white. I mean, I don't think babies, infants walk around saying well, they notice a difference, but you're calling her mom too. It's like,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, like even in Nigeria, we had pictures of
mm,
her and her kids in our living room. They were all over the place. Like I talked
mm,
about her constantly, and I remember when I came down and going to visit, and I'm looking around the living room to look for pictures of myself, and there was nothing.
right.
Um, and
Mm.
I discovered that she had fostered. She said she had fostered over 100 kids.
Where was
And I,
it? Where
what did you
was it?
say?
W-
So this was in Hythe, Kent. So very
okay, never
similar
heard of
to,
Hive before. Oh,
yes,
maybe I have.
not that
Okay.
far from Folkestone. So
Okay. Okay.
very white as well. Still
Mm-hmm.
very white. As far as I know, still conservative.
Mm.
And yeah, when I heard that she had fostered over 100 kids, and it just broke my heart because I was like,
Mm.
oh, I thought I was special. Like I had
Right.
this bubble. I had this.
Right.
I'd protected that
Mm.
part of my life so much,
Mm-hmm.
and this is
Mm-hmm.
not to take away from the love that I experienced. I mean,
I
she was
absolutely
absolutely
understand.
amazing,
Yeah.
absolutely great. Um, but part of that integration that I was talking about is
Mm-hmm.
being able to hold both the
Yeah.
fact that there was love and the fact that there was pain, and being able to be with both without sort of pushing one away or over clinging to one, but being able to embrace both is important to me. And for me, that's what healing is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know what's interesting? Life never ceases to amaze me and surprise me because I didn't think we are going to spend as much time as we're spending on this fostering experience. Um, but when you said about that your parents paid on time, something shifted in me in a way. I felt that it's like because I didn't think. First of all, I didn't think of my relationship with Pat, my Hastings mother, as fostering. I just always said my nanny. I had a nanny.
Mm,
So it was to me, it was just somebody who looked after me.
mm,
And I've told you about a documentary, a retreat that I was part of that became that's now a documentary and we're premiering soon. And when I was talking to one of the producers, and she said something. I said, well, no, she was my nanny. I don't really see this fostering. And we kept talking. She's like, well, it is fostering. And she kind of explained to me. I was like, wait, what? I was fostered, and I felt sad.
mm,
Again, it was kind of like as I listened to you, it's almost similar to you. It's like because I felt like I had this woman who looked after me, but it's a woman who looked after me, but it's almost like it's not what I basically it wasn't what I thought it was. And then as
mm,
you talked about the money aspect, something to me is like, oh yeah, they pay Pat money. Wow, wow,
mm.
I was a transaction. I was a transaction. You take care of my son, and we'll pay you this money. And it's through that journey for the past, I don't know, maybe 3 years, but especially last year was when things kind of got more intense, if you will, the documentary, the retreat, that I was able to really look at my experience, like as well. My experience for me is pretty much positive.
Mm,
I don't remember anything that was sad, other than the fact that the impact of that
mm,
experience. And I don't blame my parents. I don't blame Pat. It's just what happened. And it's funny, and I didn't even know. Do you know that that experience, the fact that our parents came from Nigeria and they will pass us over to a white family is actually conforming? Did you hear about
mhm.
that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I heard about that last year. I was like, farming? I do not like that. I'm not an animal.
yeah.
And there's a lot of stories and all people writing about their stories, about just the impact of that. Some people had really, really horrible experience.
Of
Really horrible.
course, of course, of course,
Yeah.
definitely. I think for myself, the thing that I wish had happened was conversations around difference,
Mm.
as opposed to silence around
From your
difference.
nanny or from your
From
parents?
everyone, yeah,
Okay.
from my foster mom and from my parents.
Mhm.
But it was a different time. Many of them just did not have the language around that, because
Absolutely.
what I started to internalize was difference was less than, was unacceptable, was an outsider.
Mm.
So
Mm.
one of the stories that my foster mom tells is there was a particular day when she had been painting the living room. She was varnishing the wall, painting it white, and she'd gone out of the room. And my brother came in, and I had painted my whole body white with the paint. And
Mm.
he had then said, "Oh, mom's gonna kill you." She heard, and then she came in, and then I started dancing around the living room, singing, "I'm a little white boy. I'm a little white boy."
Mm.
Now,
Mm.
when I first heard this story, I was like, "Oh, that is so cute, really, really wonderful." But when I sat with it, I was like, "Wow, this is a really traumatic story, actually."
Mm.
Because this is a child. I think I must have been about, I don't know, 4, at the time. This is a child who was looked out and saw that no one looked like him. And
Mhm.
in his quest and desire for connection and belonging, he
Mhm.
said to himself, "What can I do to belong?"
To belong.
So,
Yes.
in order to belong, this is what I need to do. And so, that is a
Mm.
trait that was born at such a young age, and it kind of tracked, it kind of followed me through different ways. So I remember moving to Nigeria. One of the ways this played out for me was being left-handed, which again was no big deal. But I remember spending the summers with one of my aunts, my dad's sister, and at the dinner
In
table
Nigeria.
in Nigeria,
Mhm.
and her constantly shouting, "Stop using your left hand. That's the
Mhm.
hand that you use to serve the devil." And
Mm.
again, in my head, I'm going, "Oh, I'm different." So that thing started to track, and there's so many other ways that it played out around difference is bad, is less than, and in order to belong, I need to leave my difference at the door,
Mhm. Hmm. So you needed to have been white and right-handed.
and many other things as
You're
well.
right. Yes, I know. I'm like, let's keep tracking it. Write that down. He to belong. He needs to be white. He needs to be right-handed. There's more coming. Woo! You came in here with you came here to like shift some things.
Hmm.
Did your parents ever talk to you about your fostering experience, having a nanny, or did they ever at any age?
Not with my dad. Not with my dad. My dad passed when I was 27.
Hmm.
So not with him. And with my mom, towards the end of her life, we started to have more conversation. So I went on a personal development retreat, a 7-day retreat, which was really, really powerful.
Hmm.
And as part of that process, we needed to bring photographs from childhood. So I remember getting in touch with my mom, and she sent me my baby album, which had loads of pictures when I was with my foster family. And I remember going to Nigeria to sit down with my mum um, after the retreat just to find out more about my past. Because when I was on the retreat, I suddenly thought, here I am. And I was in my 40s at the time, early 40s. I was like, we'd never really had conversations about it. I mean, I know when we moved to Nigeria, I was constantly asking about Mickey, like Mickey, Mickey, Mickey. And eventually my mom said, oh, I'll write her. And so we exchanged letters.
Mickey is your nanny?
Mickey's my foster mom,
Okay.
my foster mother.
Yeah.
So we exchanged letters constantly. So we were in touch, but we never really talked about it. So anyway, after this retreat, I went to Nigeria, spoke to my mom about it, and there was just so much trauma involved for my mother and for my foster mother as well, because what had basically happened, and I kind of had some idea around this because my mom from time to time had sort of let things slip. But basically what had happened was my mother became nervous that my foster mother, who is Mickey, was going to adopt me
Mm.
because I was spending most of my time there and I was calling Mickey mom. And so my dad had come down to take me for the weekend. I think there was a holiday coming up. And normally when that happened, they'd take me and then they bring me back. There'd be times where I won't be able to rest when I was in London. Like I'd be crying. My father would have to go back to Kent, bring my foster brother down to come stay with me. So anyway, my dad had gone to collect me, and my foster mom had said, "Oh, he's ill. He's recovering from the measles. Um, it's best if you not travel." Actually, no, I get it wrong. My mother had gone to collect me,
Mm.
and my foster mom had said he's ill, he needs to stay. My mom had said, no, he's my child, I'm going to take him. So she had taken me, and then my dad turned up later, my foster mom, and said he's not coming back. So I was
Oof.
just taken. There was that just force taken away, actually.
Mm.
And what I didn't realize until I was having this conversation with my mom after this retreat, my mom said I had gone to live with another foster family after that, which
Mm.
I have no memory of it.
Wow.
Like I
How old were
growing
you
up,
then when that happened?
I was five, just over, yeah, five
Hmm.
and a half. Yeah, so I'd been 8 weeks, five and a half, where I was just sort of taken away without any goodbyes, no closure.
Hmm.
Talk about abandonment wounding. Like like there was just none of that. And growing up, I always had this memory of being in a place where I knew no one. And so when my mom said, "Oh, but you lived with another family," I remember going, "Oh, but I thought I dreamt that. Like I thought that was a dream, like a
Mm.
nightmare from childhood." So I'd lived with another family, and so my mother and I spoke about it, and she said, "I have regrets about taking you away the way that I did."
Mm.
And she said, things probably would have been different had we
Mm.
not taken you away. And the way my mother told the story was my dad was going back to Nigeria, and she, yeah, she was just nervous about what might happen with me. And that
Mm.
was why she took me away from Mickey and put me with another family. Anyway,
Was
it's
that another white family?
another white family. Another white family. It's interesting because there's a photograph I've got from childhood. I'm about five and a half, going on six in the picture. And it was one of my favorite pictures growing up. I always thought it was taken at Mickey's place.
Mm.
I'm on a picnic blanket with some other white kids. So I took the picture to Mickey and I'm like, oh, was this taken here? She's like, I have no idea who these people are. So
Ooh.
the picture was taken with the other family.
Mm.
And so whenever I look at the picture, it always brings up this bittersweet
Hmm.
sort of stance because the picture is so beautiful. I look so innocent in it. And at the same time, I wish I could speak to that young version of me and say, you belong. You are
Mm.
worthy. You belong. You don't need to change any aspect of who you are in order to belong. You belong.
It's so it's something listening to you tell your story because I hear myself in your story. It's not the same situation, but that whole thing of after 4 years of being with Pat, now we're going back to Nigeria. Yes, they had a great relationship as far as I know. And it got to a point where Pat will come to London, my foster mother, come to London on the weekend. And then the following weekends, my parents will come to Hastings. And that's how they, so there were, in your case, you were there for many months, weeks before they will come and visit. Yeah. And I'm recognizing sometimes we think because we're not talking about something or because we think we're doing our best, that it doesn't have an impact. Everything has an impact.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
And, from what I'm hearing with your story, and if I think of mine, I don't have a judgment of my father, even though he thought I did when we had a conversation around it. Well, actually, I don't think he thought I had a judgment. He was just being defensive. But one of the things I remember my father used to say was during that time when I was with my foster family, he said he would often question if what they're doing is right.
Mm.
And I get it. At the same time, they didn't have an alternative. He had to go to work. Mom had to go to work. Somebody got to watch the kid. Like I said, if it was at home, it would be some auntie, some uncle, some cousin. But in this case, it's an auntie that they needed to pay. And there's so much here. All right, let's fast forward. Let's move forward. So when I think I don't know when you and I had this conversation about being a gay Nigerian man.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't know if it was at the retreat that we were at or maybe later on. But one of the things that I thought of is like, wow, that must have been difficult. I mean, Nigeria still don't accept anybody being gay. You know, is either blamed on the devil or they're going to be in prison. There's all sorts. And that's now 2023.
Mm.
What what was your story? How did you get to a point? Did your parents notice something? Did you say, okay, that's it, I gotta come out? What was it like for you to live in Nigeria knowing that you were gay? And maybe even when did you know? Or is
Mm.
that ever, I mean, I don't know, is that a fair question to say when did you know? Was there a time when you said I'm gay? Because I never remember there was never a time when I said I'm heterosexual.
Mm-hmm.
I never had that conversation with myself.
Yeah.
But in the context of being different, when you started to feel, if you did feel yourself different, I want to hear that story.
I mean, certainly in secondary school was when I noticed that I was not like the other boys.
Like we said, I'm not like the other boys. Your
Yeah,
own
yeah,
expression.
yes. So I remember in I think it was in Form 2, so I was 12,
Okay.
and the boys in my class, a couple of them had gone off with these girls, and they
Mm,
had come back and they were talking about it, and I remember thinking, oh, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the boys. Like I just remember that so clearly.
uh,
And I don't know where I picked up the fact that I felt that was wrong. I think some of it tracks back to that early story that I was sharing around difference implies less than, not good enough, wrong,
mm,
outsider. So I suspect because all the boys were talking about these girls and I wasn't interested in that, my brain went to this place of, oh, there is something wrong with me,
mm,
and therefore I need to keep this part of myself hidden.
mm,
So I just hid. I hid, never disclosed that part of who I am, and I did not quote come out. And by coming out, I'm saying come to terms with the fact that I'm gay until I was 27, 26,
mm.
27. Um,
So from between 12 and 27, you've had to like keep yourself
I
to yourself.
just, I just, I just um, suppressed, repressed, denied.
Mm,
And I mean, I wasn't having sex with anyone. So as far as I was concerned, it was like, I'm not having sex with anyone. So it doesn't really matter, actually. It
mm,
doesn't matter.
mm.
So I focused on my career and education. I threw myself into that.
So did you
Um,
think if you were having sex with a boy, with a man, well, not a man, but someone your age, if you had a relationship with a male,
mhm.
that what would that meant to you then?
I think it would have meant to me not even so much the sex. I think conversations around difference would have just been so amazing to me.
Mm,
To look around and go, oh, I am not the only one. So I remember when I was 16, maybe 17, I was in this supermarket, Leventis. I don't know whether they still have Leventis.
yes, I remember
Yeah,
that.
big departmental store. And I went
Yeah,
in, and there was this novel I saw, and it had a man on the cover who was partially clothed. And I don't know, somewhere in
I
my
bet it's a white
brain,
man too, right?
it was a white man. Like
Yep.
somewhere in my brain, I just thought that's a novel about gay people, about homosexuals.
Mm-hmm.
And I somehow managed to get enough money and I went to buy it. I bought it
Mm-hmm.
and it was my treasured
Mm,
possession. Like I read this novel because I think it was set in Berlin. I forget the name of the novel. It was set in
wow.
Berlin. But in my brain, I remember thinking, one day I'm going to leave Nigeria. I'm going to go to this place where I'm going to be able to be myself.
Wow.
And that novel I read and read and read. And there'll be times where I'd read other novels like Harold Robbins or James Hadley Chase, where it would
Mm-hmm.
have, homosexuals in there. But this was one where the protagonist was gay. And I loved that book.
Mm.
Fast forward, we're going to track back, but just fast forward a bit to after I came out. And I remember speaking to my mom. I'm like, "Well, did you ever know? Like, did Dad ever know?" And she said, after I left for the UK, he was going through my drawers so that he could put his clothes in, and he had
Mm-hmm.
found the novel. So this is like years later. Like I'm 27 now.
Wow.
Like I'd left when I was 19. So my
Mm.
dad had found the novel and he had gone into the living room with the book, waving it at my mom, saying, "You need to talk to your son.
Oh, she needs to talk to the son.
You need to talk to you need to talk to your son." And it's so fascinating actually because
Mm,
I remember my mom coming down because my dad came down to the
mm.
UK shortly after I left, and then my mom came the year after. And I remember she sat me down and she went, "I hear you are following men."
So what you talking about, Mom? Twitter? I don't follow people on Twitter.
I hear there was no Twitter at this
Right?
point. This was
I hear you're
19. When
following
was this?
men. I like
This was
that.
1990 or something. I hear you're following men, and at the time, like I wasn't having sex with anyone. I was still in the closet and all of that. But that was
Mhm,
what was going on. It was that novel thing because I remember at the time, yeah, just thinking, what's going on? What's going on? So there were family members who suspected.
mhm.
So shortly after I came, there was a guy I had met on the tube. I was very much into Christ, like I was like into fellowship and all of that. So I'd met this guy. Yeah, I was
Ah,
big time into the church, um,
wow.
and
Okay, go ahead.
and I'd met
Let
this
me
guy
get
on
some.
the
Let me get some popcorn. I'll be right back. This is getting gooder.
I'd met this guy on the tube
Mm,
and he was like preaching and me, I was like, oh yeah, sure, fine. And he
mhm,
invited me to his church. I'd gone to his church and he would call me up in the evenings and be like preaching at me. Anyway, it got a bit too much. Like it was just constant. And there was this particular day, he rang and I didn't really want to speak to him. And I said to my uncle who I was living with, "Oh, can you just tell him I'm not here?" And I think my uncle thought something was going on between us.
mm.
So my uncle was just like, don't ever call here again. Don't ever call here again. But he had told my dad about this man. My dad had gone back to Nigeria to tell my mom. So that when she then came to the UK, combined with the novel story and the men, she's like, oh, I hear you are following men. So there was all this stuff that was going on
Mm,
behind the scenes, but I never
mm,
really came out until after my dad died, actually, because what happened was after he passed, actually, just before he passed, I was slowly coming to terms with my sexuality. And I remember speaking to a family friend saying, I'm going to tell my dad. I'm going to tell my dad. And she was like, look, don't tell him. It's going to kill him.
mm,
He's not well. And after he passed, when I sat down and I reflected on it, what I came to terms with was I never fully showed up in my relationship with my dad
mm,
because there was this part of me
mm.
that I left at the door, regardless of how he was going to accept me. There was this part of me that he
Yeah.
just did not have access to. And it
Mm,
really irked me. And so I remember feeling this sense of, with my mom, I am going to bring that part of myself to the forefront, regardless of what happens. So that was my intention. That was why I decided to tell her, because I felt I didn't want to have a half relationship
mm,
with her. And so I told her, and well, it didn't go well. But I have no regrets about it, actually,
mm,
because when I pause and reflect on the relationship with my mother, I'm able to say to myself, I showed up. I
mhm.
couldn't control the outcome. I can't
Right.
control how she responds to me, but I can control how I show up.
Mm,
And I showed up, and I'm very, very proud of that. I brought my integrated self into that relationship.
mm. So, how did your mom handle it?
Um, so, I mean, the different sort of layers to this particular story. The first layer is, so my dad had died. She came to the UK, and I was debating whether to tell her or not to tell her. Do you know EastEnders, the
Hmm.
TV? So at the time, they had a gay couple in EastEnders, and I remember my mother and I were watching the show, and whenever the gay couple would come on the screen,
Hmm.
she would turn away. Like, I remember it so vivid. She would turn away, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, she knows, she knows."
Mm,
And then
mm,
after the show ended, I got up to go out to go see a friend. So I'm like, "Oh, I'll see you later." So I get to the door, and I just heard this voice behind me. I hope you are not gay. And prior to that,
oh God!
so
I hope you. I can hear the accent in that question, boy.
exactly,
Mm,
exactly. And prior to that, she had actually asked me in the
mm,
past. She had asked me. So when she
mm,
had said, I hear you're following men, she had asked me. I'm like, no, I'm not seeing anyone. So I'd always like just change the topic of the conversation, say no, move the conversation on to something else. So on this particular day, when she said that, I remember I had my hand on the doorknob, and it happened in slow motion where I thought, should I just go, why are you asking? Does it matter? Or
mhm,
should I just respond? And in that moment, I was like, this is my moment. So I
mm,
turned around and I went, yes, I am.
mm.
And she just screamed, oh, Tik Mami, oh, you know, he has killed me. He has killed me. And she just starts screaming. One of
Wow.
my neighbor rushes out, like, what's going on? I'm like, oh, my mom's just received some bad news. And
I'm not laughing at you, but that's funny. It's just a man delivered by me. But go ahead.
uh,
Wow.
and
Mm,
and for days after that, she just was in a low mood. Like, I remember saying to her, because she just she didn't change, she didn't leave the apartment. I'm like, you need to speak to someone, you need to. She's like, who can
mm,
I tell, who can I tell about this? So there's this
mm,
shame, bringing shame on the family
mhm,
that she also felt. And in the end, I was like, I've got people I can speak to, because one of the things that I had started to do prior to telling her was I had started to surround myself with people who I knew were going to be supportive of me. So I think
Mm.
that was really, really important actually. So I wasn't coming out into a vacuum. I was
Right.
coming out knowing that I had people who could
At a
hold me.
community.
Exactly. So I remember there was someone I had worked with years prior who was gay. We'd actually never spoken about. In fact, he was my boss, my boss's boss. But I knew he was gay. He always talked about his partner, and I remember getting in touch with him
Mm.
and saying, "I'm in the process of coming out. I'm going to be coming out to my mom. Um, I don't know what to do." And I remember he got these books for me on coming out and navigating all of that. So he was like an amazing support network for me. And there were other friends that I had. So I was coming out with a community behind me. And what I recognized was my mother also needed that. She also needed people to
Absolutely.
hold her. So I was like, look, you need to speak to people. You need to, yeah, you need to talk. So she reached out to, a good friend of hers, family members, to have conversations with. I remember one of the people she reached out to contacted me and said, look, your mother just wants a grandchild, so get together with a lesbian, give her a child, and she'll be happy. And I'm like, that's not my path. I don't want that. So anyway, that was the first chapter of
Mm.
coming out. And then a few years down the line, it was like it never happened.
Mm.
She would say to me, "Oh, when are you going to get married to a
Mm.
woman?" Like she just that
Yeah, the
blanked that
denial of it
conversation.
all.
Exactly. So going back to after that retreat I mentioned, and then when I went to Nigeria, I came out to her again.
Wow.
So I did the whole thing again, and it went just as. In fact, it was actually worse than the first time. So she
Was
she
it
had
difficult for you to come out again with her, or was it more difficult for her to receive it? Like, oh my God, this is really true.
It was difficult for both of us, actually. What
Mm.
I recognize with my mom, and I think it goes with that generation of mothers, is many of them did not get to meet gay people like myself. They got
Mm.
to meet gay people who were married to someone of the opposite sex and had their child, and they were seeing their gay lesbian lovers in secret.
Mm.
So that's the kind of
Mm.
gay person
Mm.
that my parents knew. And so for her, there was this thing around, why can't you be like those other people
Mm.
who present a very different, they present a straight front,
Mm-hmm.
and behind the scenes, they're doing their business. Why can't you
Yeah.
be like that?
Mm.
And for me, that's not what I wanted. That's not what I wanted. If after she died, her pastor said to me, look, in order for your mother to rest in peace, you need to get married to a woman. Otherwise, she's not going to rest in peace. And it's like, look, we've got loads of women in the church who want a husband. We know you've got a partner. You can still have your partner, but you need to be with a woman. It's part of our culture. So you can see that tracking from my birth story around belonging, connection,
Yes.
how that pull. And I was like, no, 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 no. I need
Mm.
to honor who I am. I need to
Mm.
honor my
Wow.
true story, my essence.
I feel like there's so many things in there that I want to ask questions about, but we don't have the time. However, I do want to hear your thoughts about this because what I'm thinking is it's interesting that as a culture, our Nigerian culture wasn't open or couldn't even deal with the idea of their child being gay. But yet, as a country, we allow books on that topic to be sold. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Nigeria has often been a very split culture. So you get the very rich and the very poor.
True.
You get the privileged and the people who are not privileged. You get those big gaps. There's a lot of denial that happens. There's a lot of silence that
Yeah.
happens there. So it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me
Mm.
that that happens.
Right.
So the way that Nigeria would treat an openly gay person who is coming from Europe or from America to Nigeria is very different from the way they would treat someone who's lived in Nigeria all their life who is gay or lesbian. So there is a difference. There is a difference there as well.
What are some of the differences?
There's a level of acceptance for the person who is coming overseas, who is coming from overseas.
Mm-hmm.
This level of, I don't know whether it's because they're coming with wealth,
Okay.
they're coming with status. I don't know whether it's that, but there is a difference in how that person is perceived. But what I really love actually is there are more and more young people in Nigeria who've been in Nigeria all their life who are starting to step into their power, step
Wow.
into their integrated selves and say, this is who I am. This is who I am. Certainly very different from when I was growing up, where I
Mm-hmm.
didn't see anyone like me in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
There's much more of that going on in Nigeria, which I think is absolutely amazing. Absolutely
Yes.
amazing. I mean, I know
Yeah.
there is the societal stuff that is
Yeah.
still there. There's the legislation stuff that is still there. But there are these people who are coming up and going, "Whoa, no, this is
Yes.
this is who I am.
I'm going to be me.
I'm going to be me. I'm going to celebrate me."
Yeah. Wow. And then in a way, like I have a cousin who, not cousin, nephew who was, if we talk about something like, to be fair, and the first time he said it, something about that made me kind of like, "What? Okay." But so when I say to be fair, I think of him. It's like the split culture, split way of being, split consciousness, split mindset. It's really, to be fair, it's universal.
Of course it is.
It's
Of course it is.
universal. Now, there is a way that it manifests itself in countries like Nigeria, because sometimes it could be very harsh.
Mm.
Um, because I don't know, as a straight man, I feel like, people are a bit more open in the Western world about it. And
Uh-huh.
maybe that's even why if someone from here who is gay goes to Nigeria, they looked at differently because they say, "Psh, it's a white people disease, so to think. It's
Yeah.
they, of course they were born, but to have someone in Nigeria be gay, it's like how?
Yeah, yeah. And in fact, when I came out to my mom that first time, um, a couple of days later, when I was asking her whether she knew, and she was telling me about the novel, one of the things she said was, "Is it because you were fostered? Is it because you were fostered? Your foster brother is not gay, so how can you be gay? Like
Wow.
this is something white people do."
Yes.
So yeah, she didn't see it as a cultural thing, which then goes back to because she didn't get to meet openly gay people because
Mm,
gay men, lesbians got married to people of the opposite sex,
mm, mm.
and that was how they survived really. And so yeah, and so my mother certainly saw it as something that was not part of our culture.
Culture. Absolutely. I'm
Yeah.
thinking about the person who said to you, marry a lesbian, have a child with a lesbian. Like, they were trying to find a middle ground. Wow.
Well, I mean, all that we've been talking about
Mm.
really goes back to that stuff around belonging, that the
Mm-hmm.
price of belonging. And so when
Price the
she says to
cost.
me, the
Yes.
cost of belonging. So when she says
Mm-hmm.
to me, get married to a lesbian, what she's basically saying is, this is the price you have to pay in order
Mm.
to be, if you want to be part of the fold, if you want
Mm.
to be in the pale, if you
Yes.
want to be with us,
The
this
community,
is the
the
cost.
tribe, the family.
Exactly. And it all
Yes.
comes back to that reward for connection. If you don't
Mm-hmm.
want to be excluded, if you don't
Yeah.
want to be exiled, this is what you have to do
Mm.
to belong. And so for many, I mean, I dated someone many moons ago who was Nigerian. And one of the things he used to say to me was, "Oh, we'll both get married to women and we'll be best men at each other's wedding and we will carry on seeing each other."
Mm.
And I'm like, no, that is not my path.
Mm.
That is not who I want to be. That is not part of my journey. My healing is around integration
Mm.
and doing the work to integrate all aspects of me. The
Mm.
part that is accepted and the part that is not accepted.
Absolutely. What is that process of integration been like? Integrating a part of you that wanted to be white, that wanted to be right-handed, that clearly you knew that you didn't want to be anything, but you knew that sexually you're not attracted to females, but you lived in a world in a country where it's a no.
Mm.
What's that process of integrating all of that? What was it like for you? How has it been?
It's an ongoing journey. I think healing is lifelong. It's lifelong. I think the more I do the healing work, the more I discover new wounds, scars, bruises
Yes.
that I need to tend to. But I
Mm-hmm.
think for me, the starting point was going back to the beginning to retrace my steps and
Mm-hmm.
start to look at the stories that shaped me
Mm-hmm.
and starting to honor those stories and speak to those stories. And that's why when I have conversations like this, I talk about these stories because it is part of the healing process. It's the dispelling of shame around it, that silence, secrecy, and judgment that Brené
Mm-hmm.
Brown talks about. And so for me, it's about that. It's about speaking out loud those stories that I kept hidden for many, many years. It's about acknowledging those stories and honoring those stories, the pain associated with them, the joy associated with them, and all the other emotions associated with them. So for me, it's about stories. It's about connecting with the
Yeah.
experiences that have shaped me to be who I am today and just
Mm-hmm.
really holding them, not pushing them into the
Right.
ground, not sort of over clinging to them, but really
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging those stories. Because what I notice for myself is that transformation happens when I'm able to hold those stories.
Mm-hmm.
So the story of me coming out and all of that, I'm able to laugh about it now
Mm-hmm.
because I've told that story, I've gone into it, I've reconnected with the emotions and so fun. And so now it's a story about what happened, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to a story that is still sticky, that I get lost in, that
Mm-hmm.
still feels very traumatic. So the more
Mm-hmm.
I tell these stories, the more I heal. And
Yeah, absolutely.
hopefully those who are listening, who hear
Mm-hmm.
this, connect with their own stories and start to heal through that mutual process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There. If so, are you still left-handed?
I am still left-handed.
Okay, you fought that too. It's like, nope, I came here as a left-handed man. I'm still left-handed
It
man.
was just very, very hard. It was very, very difficult to write with my
Mm-hmm.
other hand. And so, in fact, it got to a stage where my uncle would be like, "Oh, just use a knife and fork if you want to eat, because with the knife and fork, the fork goes in the left hand.
Right.
So, because if I was eating like the food with my hand,
Yes,
he
it'd
would
be
just like
obvious.
just use your knife and fork. So my uncle was very sort of supportive, but in a
Mm.
way it's about finding a coping strategy. It's
Yes.
about finding coping strategies to deal with that difference. What
And
I would have loved
mhm.
is at some point is sitting down with someone, like I said earlier on, and someone letting me know at a very core level that to be different does not mean you don't belong.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think that's what I longed to hear because
Mhm.
like we've been talking about, very very early on, I started to see difference as being just something not acceptable, and we see that in society now. Actually,
Absolutely.
when we look at things around race,
Mhm.
disability,
Mhm.
gender, this thing
Mhm.
around, oh, different is no, we want everyone to be the same. Let's just all be
Right.
this. It's like, no, diversity is amazing. Diversity is difference, and we need to celebrate all
Our
our differences.
souls crave diversity and inclusion. It's like because that's where you get to see yourself. The
Mm,
diversity of you, showing up as a book that you read to see yourself,
mm.
to be able to talk to somebody else to give you a different perspective. Yeah. if you were to talk to your 12-year-old self
Mm-hmm.
who listened to this boy, listened to the boys who were talking about being with the girls, and you knew that, I want that, what would you say to him?
I would say you're okay. You're not broken. You're not damaged. You're not flawed. Your time will come. I would say I see you.
Mm-hmm.
I would say you do not have to be anyone other than yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I would say be patient. Life will bring so many amazing, wonderful people into your life. So for now, simply enjoy being different. There's nothing wrong with you.
Being different and having to navigate life, especially with some of the charged things, race and sexuality. What are some of the gems, the gifts, the treasures that you've gained from the experience of being different and holding on to the difference?
Yeah, I think it's made me very conscious of exclusion. And
Mm,
so in spaces, one of the things I'm always very passionate about is making sure that those people who are on the edge, the marginalized, feel
mm,
included.
mm,
So it's certainly given me that sense of, yeah, exclusion. It's given me that sense of perspective,
mm,
in terms of who is in and who is out. So I think it's giving me a broader perspective.
yeah, yeah. And I would say a sort of compassionate, create
Mm,
being more compassionate to the ones that are excluded, made invisible.
hmm. Yeah,
And I'm sure you're the one that runs without even trying to the underdog, just by default, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The marginalized, the socially excluded,
Mm-hmm.
the people whose voices are silenced. I mean, I'm drawn to those populations because I
Yeah.
am part of that population.
Mm. So before we release this conversation, there's a lot that's happening right now where people are. I don't. It's not even that people are vocal. We are in a time where something in us is saying no. We would not be silenced.
Hmm.
No, being different is part of the whole.
Yeah.
And we all have a lot to say about a lot of different things. How many podcasts are out there now? Everybody has a podcast because we want to say something. Social media, the camera, we got the camera on the phone. We want to express how we see our viewpoint. 200 years from now, what do you imagine the world will look like?
I have no idea. I have
Mm,
no idea. But what I would hope that it looks like is we are making space for wholehearted dialogue.
mm,
Like we're really making space for that. So yes, everyone's got a podcast, everyone is recording on their phones and all of that. But that is very different from dialogue. That is very different
absolutely.
from dialogue. So when I'm talking about dialogue, I'm talking about dialogue when the camera is not rolling.
Yes.
I think that is really, really important. People are having courageous conversations, honest conversations, heartfelt conversations. People are stepping into each other's realities where they're going, tell me your story.
Yes.
Tell me the stories that shaped you.
Yes.
And, and I listen. And then the other person goes, oh, thank you for listening. Tell me your stories. Tell me what shaped you. Like
Mm-hmm.
we do that exchange and connect and go, ah, tell me, and how did that feel, and we connect that
Yes.
way. I really hope that there is more of that happening, because
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that it's a powerful way for transformation,
Yes.
at a personal level, at a
Mm-hmm.
relational level, and at
Mm-hmm.
a collective level as well.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I really hope that we find our way back to those wholehearted conversations. One of the amazing memories that I have from being in Nigeria. So even though there was loads of pain for me when I was out there were also amazing times. And one of the amazing times would be when NEPA would take the light,
Uh-huh.
and I'll have some of the kids from our block come to our house, and I'd sit down and I'd tell them stories, and
Mm,
would just tell stories, and they'd listen, and someone else would tell a story and would listen. And I just really loved that whole community connection. And I really hope that years from now that we find our way back to a new transformational sort of path that
mm,
demonstrates that.
Find a way back home, home to ourselves, home to each other.
Yeah,
And I really do believe we're creating that.
I hope
I
so.
know you do, because what happens in the future is based on what we're doing now. And I know that this conversation is creating a shift in the
Mm,
ethers that someone is tapping into.
I
And
hope so.
man, I love you, my brother.
Thank you. I love you
It is
too.
such a blessing to know you, to hear your stories. And when I hear your stories, it affirms me, because there were some things I didn't have language for. There's some things I just went through life, like, oh, okay, whatever. And then hearing your story reminds me of something that happened.
Mm,
Even just as simple as, yeah, my foster parent was paid for the service. I Even though I don't even know if I can say I knew that, but when you said it, was like, oh yeah, that's true. They paid her. It's like something that I'm going to sit with. And I told you earlier when we were recording, and while recording, I was nudged by spirit to share this, and I feel like I want to share this. So, this is my biological mother, who is
oh.
now passed. She's on the other
Hmm.
side, not in the physical body.
Hmm.
And I think I do it this way. And this is me around whatever age, two.
Oh.
I looked at this picture a few days ago and I was like, it's almost like I'm saying, where do I go? Like the body's turning one way and the head is looking like really how I felt based on the healing that I went through this
Mm.
past few days. And then that's my
Oh
biological, yeah,
wow.
that's my nanny carrying me, foster mother.
Is that Pat?
Yeah, that's Pat. Yeah.
Oh.
And, I love how life orchestrates things. And what I
Mm.
went through the last few days about healing that fear of being rejected. And you and I were supposed to have this conversation a few weeks ago, but this
Mm.
is the perfect time.
Thank you.
Anything you want to leave with our audience, share something in your heart that you want to say, or maybe you're thinking, I wish he asked me about that, whatever, before you go.
Um, there's a quote that I love. I always forget who says it. Um, I'm not going to try and guess who said it. I'm just going to say the quote. And the quote is, "The pain of the past is often held in suspension until we're ready for it to find us." The pain of the past is often held in suspension until we're ready for it to find us.
Mm,
And and as I reflect on our conversation today, it really ties in with that quote
yeah,
actually.
absolutely.
When I think about my journey and confronting all that stuff, there were times where I was not ready for it, but it was held in suspension,
Waiting.
waiting. So yeah,
Mm,
and when it does find us, my hope and prayer for everyone, myself included, is that we meet it with grace, with compassion
yes.
and humility.
Yeah. Mm, mm, mm. That is the word. I listeners, I know I didn't talk about. I referenced this healing that I went through in the past few days, which was confronting the fear of being rejected and how that interfered with my life and how I didn't show up. And Adewale, you remember I was saying that statement, God does not give us more than we can handle.
Mhm.
For me, that quote it's the same thing, saying the same thing. That
Mm,
we got to be ready for that healing. It doesn't come a day too early, a day late. It comes at the right time. And I'm
mm,
telling you, what I went through, the pain that I felt physically in my heart for like 24 hours, I don't think I had what it took to hold that
mm,
a week, a month before the
mm,
past few days.
mm.
Thank you, my brother. I
Thank you,
knew it
my
was going to be
brother.
a great conversation. I just knew it. I knew it. And I love and appreciate you. You're a blessing. And I appreciate how you're showing up in the world.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yes.